Benvenuti, questa è un'intervista, siamo onorati di avere qui Scott Baum, siamo al terzo convegno della Società Italiana di Psicoterapia. Il tema di questo convegno è disagi emozionali e regolazione degli affetti in tempo di crisi. Continueremo l'intervista in inglese e poi avrete la possibilità di avere i sottotitoli. So, thank you for coming and what you can say to us, to young therapists, bioenergetic therapists, to improve our work?
Improve?
Yeah.
I'm not sure this is about improvement. In the history of healing, we say in English, healing is a calling. You are called to it. You are inspired. I won't say it's not a business. It is a business.
Yeah.
Because if I don't charge my patients for my time, they cannot pay me for my skill, but they pay me for my time. If I don't charge them, then I have to go raise chickens or fix cars. So it's a business. But it is also a calling. And a calling requires that we are inspired to put the welfare of our patients ahead of our own in the clinical setting. So one of the things that we get from Reich especially, but also from the psychoanalytic group around him, Freud and Fenichel and others, is a sense that our patients and we are part of a community. So if we put our patients' welfare ahead of our own in the clinical setting, then we are making a commitment to the community. And the commitment is to heal, to reduce suffering, to empower, to support people in becoming more themselves and more individuated, more separate, more autonomous. And that is very demanding work. And I think it is inspiring work. And so my job, I'm a senior person now, my job is to support all of you who take on this mission.
Do you think, can you explain your inspiration, your personal inspiration?
That's not so easy. I have to really think about how to answer that. My inspiration has gone through a number of stages in my life. The earliest stage was for my own survival to become capable of identifying with people who understood intuitively a lot about emotional and psychological process, but were also very, very destructive people. And so my identification with them was a kind of, we say in English, a kind of deformation, a narcissistic and psychopathic and narcissistic and psychopathic deformations that come out of damage and attempts to manage damage. And that, combined with a certain talent, I don't know where talent comes from, it just is, and it's no use to deny it, it doesn't help, it's not real. And a desperate need to manage my own disturbance pushed me very far along. In my later life, I have been inspired by people around me, my late wife, my therapists, my children, who I see are able to do things that I cannot do. They can experience and feel in their own bodies the goodness in other people. I can observe it, they can feel it, and it inspires them. And so, in my identification with them, and my wish to be more like them, a kind of, we say, aspirational self. I find myself now wanting to support people who work with patients and even with colleagues who are fighting to be that self who can do that, who can see and experience that in others. And so that's become my latest inspiration, to support therapists in that work.
About catharsis. It's always a good experience for you, like therapists and like patients.
I will say some things about catharsis tomorrow and also in my workshop. It's a very misunderstood, I want to say concept, but it's so organic that it's not just a concept. So, catharsis in its original meaning is a powerful and profound emotional, psychological experience that results in a new integration. And so it raises the question whether integration is a positive value. Is it always a good thing? And that's not so easily answered, because an integration can result in an awareness of self that a person chooses not to have. Facing oneself is a value. It is not a biological imperative. And often therapists feel called on to present patients with a view of themselves, of the patient, as seen through the experience of another person. And often therapists feel, including myself, very militant about that. You know, you are here for therapy, you should see yourself as another person sees you. But that's a very big choice in life. And coming in the door doesn't mean that's what the person wants. That's a discovery in the therapeutic process. Catharsis can take a person into that moment of looking in the mirror. And if it's not thought through by the therapist, or if life circumstances just bring it, it can be too fast. So we, in New York, this year, we are doing a program which we have named Titrating to the Trauma. Titrating means adjusting the dose to suit not only the situation, but also the body of the person. You know, if we did medicine correctly, then every time you write, a doctor, physician, in my system, every time a physician writes a prescription, then they write the prescription for milligrams per kilogram. Not take this, because the size of the body, the density of the body, the composition of the body will affect how the medication works. Most of the time, it doesn't matter so much, because human beings are very adaptable and we can take a broad range of substance. But in the case of strong emotional experience, it can be too much. And so part of the therapist's job is to adjust the force and the impact of the intervention, to titrate it, so that the catharsis that occurs is within the tolerance range of the patient. It's cathartic when it's meaningful. If it's meaningless, it doesn't matter how big it is or how small, and if it's meaningful, it doesn't matter how big it is or how small it is. And so we are a little bit in bioenergetic work, a little bit we carry the burden of the 60s still on our shoulders, which is the burden of breaking free of repression, breaking free of don't say anything, don't make a big sound, don't have a strong feeling. And somewhat times have changed, and now people come less with that feeling of neurotic guilt, oh, I can't speak, and more with a feeling of anxiety and agitation. And anxiety and agitation are unbounded feelings, and repression and neurotic guilt are bounded states. So working with unbounded states requires a different technical approach. But it's still cathartic, because when a person goes from an unbounded state to a bounded state, yeah, then there's a cathartic possibility in that change. So it's not about what we observe. The catharsis comes in the meaning of the experience and in the integration.
The last question is about pleasure. You say that pleasure connecting benevolence in the universe with goodness. Can you explain?
Yeah, I will try. I had this realization actually quite a few years ago. I'll tell you the story, because the story helps to explain how I came to this. I was teaching in a group in Holland many, many years ago now, and the group was working with a strong expression of aggression, and I repeated something at one point that a colleague of mine had said without thinking about it, which was to invite them to express some healthy sadism. And at the time, the group had some very strong women in it, and I was, at that time, my late wife was accompanying me, although she was not yet a faculty member. And they, together, my wife and them, said, that's a crazy idea, and very destructive. And don't say that ever again until you think about it. So I thought about it. I argued, because I'm always ready to argue, but they were right. Right that I hadn't thought it through. Not if I could present what I thought, I could make an explanation. So I thought about it a lot. And I thought about what their objection was. And I realized that the problem is we use one concept. It doesn't matter what the word is, but we use one concept for too many functions. And it's good to be specific about energetic functions. They are not all the same, just as all feelings are not all the same, that love is not the same as admiration or appreciation. Energetically, these are different states. So, sadism is connected to an experience of gratification. I have the urge to have revenge or to get even. It's not aggression, it's not anger. It's not the momentary, oh, you hurt me, now I push you away. It is a charge in the body to get even. You know, we have it in the mouth and the teeth and it's in the jaw. Okay. When that is expressed, it's relieving. Oh, I'm glad that's out of my body. And it's gratifying. Oh, I got them. But that's not the same as the pleasure of love. It can't be. Just look at the body expression. We don't need to, well, we should analyze it more deeply, but we can see right from the presentation. And starting, well before Freud in the history of human beings, but certainly with Freud and his attempt to understand the experience of orgasm and connection and the oceanic feeling that he talks about, and then Reich takes it really further and talks about the politics of this experience. It isn't only about the right to have a good feeling in one's body or to express oneself sexually. Pleasure is about a connection to the goodness in the universe. I cannot explain what that is. I cannot say it comes from a divine being or it comes from the way the universe works, but I know that there is a force of goodness that is connected to, we call it benevolence, which is the wish for good for others. And then there are contrary forces for malevolence, for badness, which we also have to face directly. They're not necessarily balanced out. So, what happens to people in my personal experience, in my clinical experience, when they are exposed to not only trauma, because trauma can be neutral in intention. If I lose a family member in a flood, that's very traumatic. But the water has no intention. It doesn't come to kill my family, it just flows. The trauma is to me because I am connected. If someone comes to kill my family because they are Jews, or because, since half my family or my children are half Italian because they're Italian, then there is an intention with the trauma. And the intention is malevolent. It's intentionally destructive. And when that happens to children at a very early age, and this is my theory now, not everybody's theory, early enough to create a schizophrenic or a borderline compensation, it destroys the connection to benevolence, to goodness. And so when we talk in theory about anhedonia, the inability to feel pleasure, we don't mean a person who cannot enjoy themselves, go to the cinema or watch a football game. We mean, I believe and I feel and I observe in my patients, we mean someone who cannot experience in the body the connection to that pleasure. And how do we as therapists, and this is some of what I will say tomorrow, how do we as therapists work with people who live in that universe and make it possible to do the work of bioenergetic analysis, which is the work of connecting to pleasure? When we are working with someone who, at least at the moment of the clinical encounter, cannot experience pleasure. So for me, the larger issue, as I said before, about community is that being connected to pleasure in that way is the origin point of a moral sensibility, an ability to know good from bad and right from wrong. And we know now from research that infants at 6 months seem to show a very beginning moral sense. This wonderful research by Paul Bloom and his colleagues. So that's the time when the connection to pleasure is susceptible to being destroyed. And that's the level at which we are working with people like that in therapy. And then all the way up through the developmental process at each developmental level, at the level of existence, at the level of being welcomed into the world, at the level of feeling like I have power and I am a good person who has power and I have authority and I am allowed to decide for myself and I have autonomy and I can be responsible for my own choices. At every developmental level, there are relationships to this issue of pleasure that have to be worked through, assuming that the connection to pleasure is possible. And without that connection, therapists have to decide how we are going to relate to our patients who don't have that experience.
Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Salutiamo Scott Baum, siamo stati molto felici di averlo qui tra noi e anche molto nutriti da questa intervista molto intima in questa situazione che altrimenti sarebbe stata difficile con un meeting con tante persone, quindi lo ringraziamo e questo ricordiamo che è il terzo convegno della Società Italiana di Psicoterapia e siamo molto onorati di averlo avuto come ospite. Thank you very much.
For inviting me.
Thank you very much.